After high school many years ago, I was in a really bad place. My guardian had kicked me out after graduation. She didn't help me find a place to stay, so I lived in my car for a couple of months. I met some heavy metal dudes at work one day, and I'd seen them around town. All of my other friends knew who they were. Everyone loved them. We became friends over a couple of months, and they offered for me to move in with them. I agreed. Looking back now, man, do I wish I just stayed in that car. My two main roommates were brothers named Andrew and Seth. They were in a band. They also believed in, a cult and anything of that sort. I never really personally believed in that stuff, but I'm not one to tell someone what they should believe. They had to let me live with them rent-free for several months, so who was I to complain? Being the only female in a house full of young men, though, I was always sort of looking over my shoulder. I mean, you never know who you can trust, right? It turns out, I was very right to worry as well. So over some time, their friends started to stay with us for longer periods of time, sometimes weeks in fact. Their friends were another group of brothers that they had gone to school with. There were 5 brothers in total, but only 2 ever stayed with us consistently. The younger brother, Mark, was very polite. He cleaned up after himself and always helped with the household chores and whatnot. The other brother, Adam, had a laundry list of mental problems. He had apparently done some, bad drugs back in the day or something, and it had developed into what seemed like psychosis of the religious sort. He had actually done time in prison for assaulting a woman with a Bible. He would often look you in the eyes and tell you that he could see how you would die. Once he told me that I was possessed by a demon and I needed to cleanse my soul. Everyone in the house knew that he had these problems, but he was their friend. They helped him through the hard times and gave him a place to stay. Otherwise, he would be on the streets. I was always on guard around him, though, after the things that he told me. Nobody else seemed to be as concerned as I was, but they should have been. Because one day, I was sleeping and my phone rang. It was my boss. He asked if I could come into work an hour early. It was only 12 p.m. and I was broke and had nothing better to do, so I said yes. I got up and began getting ready to leave, and I walked out into the living room to see Mark and Andrew sitting on the couch, while Adam sat on the floor by the TV. He was watching scripture videos on YouTube or something, some real end-of-day stuff. And that was fairly common for him, though, so I just went about my business. I said goodbye, and then I left for work. My shift at work was almost complete, too, when the phone rang. My boss answered, handing the phone to me and said, "For you." I was just a cashier, so I assumed it was a friend that couldn't reach me on my phone or something. I answered the phone, and I heard a man's voice that I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Detective Williams. Listen, something happened at your apartment today, and we need you to come to the station to talk about it." I left work immediately. I had assumed one of the brothers had been arrested for drug dealing or something. I was very wrong about that, but I got to the station and I was buzzed in. An officer escorted me to a small cold room with a camera. He gave me a bottle of water and left me by myself for about 30 minutes. My mind was racing, thinking about what could have happened. But he came back in and informed me that Adam had actually stabbed and killed Andrew at around 1 p.m. To say that I was shocked was an understatement. I mean, I just left the house an hour before it happened and everything seemed fine. I asked if there had been a fight, and the detective informed me that there hadn't been a fight, and it seemed to have happened just out of nowhere. I gave my statement to the police, and I left with nowhere to go, still in shock and confused out of my mind. Our apartment was now a crime scene, so I just went to another friend's house to watch the news report, since the police wouldn't give me any information on the case. And over the next couple of days, the information began to be released. And it was true. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew once, not twice, but he had stabbed him over and over and nearly decapitated the guy. After the murder, he ran down the road apparently, still holding the murder weapon. He called 911 and informed them what he had done. I sat there and just watched the news report in absolute horror. We had known that he was unstable, but this He had fully confessed to the brutal murder as well, and provided police with all of his notebooks and stuff, and just anything that he could. And he had apparently been planning to murder all of his brothers, my roommates, and even me. He honestly thought that we were possessed by demons, and this was the only way to free us. Luckily, none of his other intended victims were home that day, but Mark unfortunately witnessed the murder. Luckily he escaped, but if I hadn't have got that call from my boss that day, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't be alive today. Back in 2013, I was moving from Florida to Kentucky for a new job with a close friend that I grew up with. It's about a 15-hour drive, so we decided to leave around 6 p.m. and drive straight through to get to Kentucky the next morning. The route takes you through Atlanta and then a long and sort of dark stretch of mountains in Tennessee where there are no exits, no cell service, and it's very steep. There is also about an hour-long drive where there are signs everywhere that say no jake brake and no braking downhill when you're in the mountains. While driving, it honestly feels very dangerous going downhill, and this was in November and the roads were very slick at night. So it was about 3 a.m. though, and I was driving and my friend was in the passenger seat just sleeping. Well, we were coming down one of the mountains, and up ahead I see a bright light that is slowly getting bigger as I approach. And soon I realize that what I'm seeing is actually a car fully engulfed in flames in the left lane at the bottom of the hill. I yelled to my friend to wake up so we can figure out what the heck to do. Obviously, if anybody is in the car, they could not have survived that, and we were definitely not equipped to help. It also seemed like a dangerous idea to stop the car because it was at the bottom of the mountain, and we were worried that we would be in danger of oncoming cars so late at night. I mean, the car was literally engulfed in flames, and I barely saw it until I was close up to it. But as we're trying to figure out what to do next, we both realize that neither of us actually have cell service here, but we see a sign for a gas station 2 miles up the road. We get to said gas station and tell the guy working there about what happened. He tells us, unfortunately, that this is something that happens from time to time and that he would call a state trooper for us so we could tell him exactly what happened and give any information that we could. Less than 10 minutes later, too, the trooper pulls up and we tell him exactly what happened. But he's really confused because he says that to get to the gas station to meet us, he was driving the same direction that we were driving, and there were no other exits for 15 miles, and it would have been impossible for him to miss a flaming car. And after a few minutes of us basically arguing with this guy about what we saw, and assuring him that we weren't on any drugs and hadn't been drinking, we travel south with him following us to the location of the accident. And sure enough, when we get there, there's no burning car there. No car at all, in fact. To this day, me and my friend are sure of what we saw. I mean, we passed within maybe 10 feet from the car itself, 1 lane over. We clearly saw a burning car. But apparently it never happened. So first off, I've told this story before in a public setting around 2008. I was living in Louisiana at the time and had called into Coast to Coast AM and told this story to George Norrie, which was a pretty cool experience. I didn't have a whole lot of time to tell some of the details, so you'll be getting the unedited version, so to speak. So, it happened somewhere between 1997 and 1999. I was in my late teens and we were living in New Mexico up near the Four Corners. My parents were pastors at a local church in a very small town. We had lived outside of town, sort of in the middle of nowhere, and there were a few houses sprinkled around us. Surrounding was, at least where there were no houses, there was some brush and a lot of desert. Ever since we moved there too, the locals always told us about skinwalkers. Even people in the church warned us about them. One guy in the church, in fact, swore up and down that when he was a truck driver, he saw a skinwalker in its human form running alongside his truck where he was going about 80 miles per hour. but since I didn't witness it, I just kind of left it at that. I had heard many different tales on the origins of the skinwalkers, but from the locals and the Native Americans mostly. There was a Native American, in fact, who went to our church, who still held on to his Navajo beliefs, who told me what I always assumed to be a more accurate description. He told me that when people of his tribe had a child out of incest, the tribe leaders take the baby out into the desert to be raised by the wolves. The wolves would raise it and they would become skinwalkers, having the powers to turn into anything, animals, humans, etc. The story fascinated me. He just seemed to know for sure that this was the accurate tale. Obviously, I can't verify anything, but then he warned me to never whistle at night, which I thought was pretty weird, but I just never did, until one night. So, it was in the fall, around 11 at night. I was in my bedroom, which was the furthest room from anyone in the house and near the garage, just watching TV or playing PlayStation or something. My mother was in her bedroom. My dad was at the church studying, as he always did till around midnight. My brother had a friend over that night, and they were going to spend the night on the back patio, which was a long rectangular room with screen windows all down it. Now, like I said, I was in my bedroom minding my own business when my brother and his friend came banging on my door. Annoyed, I opened the door, and my brother, who is 4 years younger than me, and his friend were both really frightened. My brother says that they were in the patio goofing off, and they heard someone walking around the backyard and saw what looked like to be the top of a white bald head walk by the screen windows. Now, normally, I would believe my brother since he would never make this kind of stuff up, but his friend was a huge liar and had told very tall tales about having been to Mars and whatnot, even showing us the red dirt, which looked an awful lot like the red dirt that you could find throughout the area, I might add. Of course, by this time, I had experienced a lot of paranormal stuff myself, but I was still very much skeptical. And so, bravely and annoyed, I grabbed my jacket and a flashlight, and the three of us went out to the patio. It was always just so much more creepier at night too, because it was just so dark out there, and the only light came from a nearby lamppost a few yards down the street. Our backyard was insanely small, except for the right-hand side of it, which was a bit bigger but held a trampoline which took up the better part of it. We stepped out of the patio, my flashlight shining around the yard, but then we saw something. That was when I started hearing the crunching of leaves too coming from the front yard, so the three of us went through the back gate to the front yard. Now, our front yard was huge and had roughly 9 apple trees. There was even a large creepy tree in the corner of the yard near the street that I always stayed clear of for some reason. But we had a close neighbour too, literally on the other side of the wooden fence. It was a nice family that had a daughter about my brother's age, and they had also had a bunch of chickens, and sometimes they would wander into our yard, so that is what I thought it was walking around our front yard, and the thing that I thought that I saw. But shining the flashlight around, I couldn't see any chickens. But I did see something white walk behind a tree near the wooden fence, and that was when I got very curious. The three of us walked slowly to the tree, and I was being the protective big brother and kept the other two behind me. But before I knew it, I heard a loud whoosh and felt a gust of wind, like something flew by us. My brother screamed out in pain. My brother always had his shirt off, which annoyed me because back then I was overweight and pretty self-conscious, but I noticed on his chest that he had 3 long scratches across it. Scared now, and obviously in shock, my brother ran back inside the house, leaving me and his friend. It all happened so quickly, but I ran towards the street where I was sure whatever it was had gone, his friend close behind me, and once we reached the end of the property, I could hear the sound of bare feet running down the paved road. I shined my light towards the sound, but I never saw anything. And so, it was at this point that I whistled some tune, and from down the road I heard the same tune whistled back. Intrigued, I whistled again, this time a different tune, and again the same tune was whistled back. My brother's friend started getting scared and kept trying to get me to go back inside, but I was just too intrigued at this point. I whistled for the 3rd time, and that was when, very close by, we both heard a male voice say, "Hey kid, come here." There was no hesitation. The two of us bolted straight back inside. We went to go tell my mother what happened, and she was already frightened because she was tending to my brother's scratches on his chest. He told her what happened, and my mother told us to stay inside. My mother, too, has had some pretty scary paranormal encounters before. At some point, I need to tell those stories soon as well. But, needless to say, she believed us. I've never forgotten that encounter. My brother brushes it off these days, making it out to not be a big deal. But I know differently, as does my mum. It's one of the many incidences in my life that really bothers me to this day.